Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Ashok Ramani, who's a partner at Davis Polk. Ashok, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Ashok, let me start by asking you why you went to law school in the first place.
I didn't really have anything better that I thought I could do with my time. And so maybe I can spin that up a little bit. So, I'm a son of two immigrants to the U.S., had no lawyers in my family, and I had no real exposure to the law myself other than watching the TV show L.A. Law when I was, back in junior high, back in the 80s. And so being a lawyer was the furthest thing from my mind. And when I was growing up in the South Asian community, you kind of had two accepted career tracks. One was medicine and one was engineering. And so I went to Berkeley for college and figured, okay, I'll do electrical engineering, computer science. Did that for a year, didn't like it. And then, had a fairly early existential crisis thinking, man, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a doctor. What am I going to do?
Right.
And so, I had luckily taken an economics class my freshman year and really liked that. And so switched and just went into economics and really enjoyed that subject matter. Thought maybe I would get a PhD in economics, maybe become an economics professor. And then on a lark, I thought, well, why don't I take this LSAT? I seem to do pretty well in standardized tests, and who knows? And so I did, again, at this point, not having any idea what lawyers did. Took it, did reasonably well, and then applied and got into a couple of law schools, including Harvard, and then was kind of faced with the choice, okay, do I want to go out and go into finance or go into and get an economics degree, or should I try this law school thing? And again, randomly, really more than anything else, I chose to go to law school.
Interesting. So now, how did you like law school when you got there? I mean, what did you think? Was it what you expected, or how'd you like it?
It was as I expected. I really liked my classmates. I had lived on the West Coast. I was born in New York, but I had lived on the West Coast basically for all of my life. And then, as I mentioned, went to Cal for undergrad. And so it was a completely new experience going back east and going to Cambridge. And I remember my first week there, one of my classmates asked me sincerely, hey, so you grew up in California. Do you guys get 2 hours for lunch so that you can go surfing? And so it was a very interesting experience. Obviously the subject matter was great, and I was blessed to be able to go to a school like Harvard because you could take classes at the Graduate School of Business, at the Kennedy School, some of the other graduate programs, which I was able to do and learn some very interesting stuff. But the thing was, when I went to law school, I just assumed I was not going to be a litigator, let alone a trial lawyer, because again, I didn't know much about it. And my impression of somebody who would stand up in court and make an argument, be someone's champion, if you will, didn't really look anything like me. And there weren't that many Asian American students at HLS at the time. There are way more now than there were at the time. But I think we were maybe the beginnings of what ended up being a much larger wave of Asian Americans going into the law, and especially into litigation. And so I had assumed I would just do corporate work. And I was fortunate. I got a really good summer associate position after my 1L year in San Francisco at what was then Pillsbury Madison Sutro, and was able to do corporate work all summer and just didn't really find it to my liking. I thought maybe, that's kind of a more established firm. And so my next summer, I was fortunate to get a summer associate gig at Cooley down in the Valley. And this was in 1996, 1997. So the dot-com era was just kind of getting its start and just starting to take off. And so there was a lot of excitement at the time about all these startup companies doing all this internet type stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was really fortunate to work with some great people at Cooley over that summer, but didn't really enjoy doing the corporate work then as well. And so, again, I had a little bit of a crisis thinking, man, I don't really like this corporate stuff. What am I going to do? I guess I'll maybe just go into investment banking or become a management consultant or something. And then I did clinical work at law school and just fell in love with the idea of being somebody's champion, whether it's going to housing court to fight against an unlawful eviction attempt
Hmm.
and deal with totally unacceptable living conditions, or going to federal court and explaining why an elderly person shouldn't have their disability benefits taken away. It really struck something in me, and it really moved me, and it caused me to think, okay, this is maybe really my calling.
Interesting.
And that's kind of what how in many ways I lucked into the career I've been doing now for about 25 years.
Interesting. So, it's kind of funny because not many people do corporate law, especially, in the late 90s with startups and didn't like it because they usually find that very exciting. It's curious that, that just didn't strike a chord with you. It just, what just seemed unexciting, or what was it that you didn't like about it?
You know, not that it was unexciting, because it was great, and you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with these inventors and founders who are doing all this really cool stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the way that I think about it, and maybe this speaks poorly about my sense of self and my ego, is I felt like the lawyers, only when you got to a very senior level were the lawyers really participating in the decision making. And it seemed like there were years where much of what you were doing was documenting what other people were deciding.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just the clinical work, but I thought in litigation, you have much more of a chance to have a say early on, and you often will have clients really turning to you and looking to you to help drive a result,
Yeah.
one way or the other. And at least, and it's probably just my failure to perceive it properly, but at the junior level, I didn't think that that would happen on the corporate side for many, many years. And I think I was too impatient.
I think that's a pretty good observation, actually. What is it you think you like about litigation? Is it like a competitive side? Is it desire to win? What is it, or is it just suit your personality better? What is it you think about litigation that resonates with you so well?
I think it probably does suit my personality. I mean, I'm competitive. I like to win for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But in taking a step back, the three things that I like most about this job, I would say, are going to court
Mm-hmm.
for a whole variety of reasons we can talk about. I mean, there are many lawyers who are great, what I think of as litigators, who spend a lot of their time on the phone and in conference rooms.
Yeah.
I'm a trial lawyer. I think of
Mm-hmm.
myself as someone who likes going to court, and I spend most of my time there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of point number one. Point number two is helping the clients think through strategic issues. I mean, we're fortunate because all of the cases that we do are like brand new puzzles. And so you got to kind of start from the ground up with each one. And it's fascinating to me. And it's amazing to me that we get paid for getting to puzzle through those things. The third thing is kind of mentoring younger lawyers. And so I think putting all of those together, the artistry of being successful in court, the intellectual challenge of working with clients on very thorny problems, and the personal satisfaction in seeing younger lawyers get opportunities, I think collectively make it very appealing.
Now, you mentioned, so you did the clinical work at Harvard. It really made you decide, okay, I really like litigation. How did you get into IP? Like, how did you end up choosing that as your area of specialty?
Two reasons. One, even though I was on the East Coast and I later did a federal clerkship in DC, I ultimately always wanted to come back to California.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was pretty clear at the time that if one wanted to do civil work, given the fact that the technology industry was already rising to preeminence, that it probably made sense to do something that had some technological focus. So that was kind of the baseline. But then the second point that really made IP make sense as a focus was that even then in the late 90s into the early 2000s, civil cases going to trial were very much on the decline. And I really wanted to try cases because I found the going to court part really the accelerant, the part that was very exciting. And IP cases were still getting tried. And, when I would read headlines, I would see the big civil cases that were going to trial in the area often had some significant IP component, whether a patent component, trade secret component, what have you. And so those together made it make sense.
And plus, this way you get to play engineer, even though you didn't get to be one.
That's right. I have to tell you a funny story. So, people often talk about, stereotypes that you face as a lawyer. And, I think all of us kind of go through something like that. Yeah. One thing that somewhat goes to my benefit along the lines of what you're saying is judges, even people on the other side, they often assume that because I'm South Asian, that I have some kind of engineering background,
Yeah,
even though I
yeah.
don't, So it's great.
Perfect. So, give me a feel for the kind of range of technologies you worked on. I mean, I'm sure you've done all kinds of things, but just give me kind of a feel for the kinds of stuff you've done.
It's pretty much everything, as you say. Just looking at cases that I've got on my docket right now, there are some related to interactive program technology, how guides are used on televisions, computer networking, formulation of anti-obesity and diabetes therapeutic, semiconducting, chamber technology. So kind of the full gamut, I would say.
Yeah.
Probably most of my career has focused on networking and software related patents, but with significant cases in semiconductors and in biopharma.
What would you say the thorniest technology you've had to really wrestle with it has been?
There was some cases I had years ago that related to audio compression technology,
Interesting.
and it was in the mid aughts, and the technology was used in speakerphones, and there were these patents. Normally I read a patent, it takes a couple of reads through, but I'm usually able to pretty much understand what's going on. This was like reading some foreign language. I mean, it might as well even have been not been written in, Roman script. I had no idea what was going on. And several of my colleagues who were engineers were similarly situated. We ultimately had to engage a Nobel laureate as our expert, who had to take us through several rounds of discussion before we were able to really get some grasp of what was going on. That case settled relatively early, I think in part because of the utter complexity of what was that was by far the most complicated.
Interesting. What is your mix of patent versus non-patent? I mean, I'm sure it's IP related, but what is your mix between patent and non-patent work, would you say?
So, these days it's about 50-60% patent work, and call it about 30-something% trade secret work, and a little bit of trademark and copyright.
Do you have a preference between those three? Like, do you like one more than the other? Or?
I like whatever's likely to go to trial. So I will do any of them. I will say the patent and trade secret cases, given the firm that I'm at, Davis Polk, the nature of the types of cases where it makes sense for a client to hire us, there have to be pretty big stakes. It either has to be an existential case for the company or really significant dollars. And so you don't see that quite as often in the trademark side. And you sometimes see it in the copyright side, but usually those cases tend to be more on the patent and trade secret side. And so I think for that reason, we end up seeing more of those cases. And that level of complexity and those stakes also allow us to really look at each case in a bespoke way and come up with a customized game plan for how we want to handle it.
On the patent work, do you tend to be more defense or more plaintiff, or you do a mix of those?
We do a mix of those. Last I looked, it was about 2/3 defense, 1/3 plaintiff. I have a trial in about a week and a half that's on the defense side of patent case. The last trial I had, a jury trial this past summer in July, was on the plaintiff side.
Do you have a preference? Do you like being on the plaintiff or the defense more?
It really depends. As I said, I view all these cases as a puzzle, and you got to figure out. And so, there are ways you can position the case to make it appealing. But that said, once you get to the point of actually talking to the jury, it's always fun to be a plaintiff.
Do you find it's almost an advantage not to have been an engineer, because then that way, you're in a great position to kind of translate things to non-engineers? And what do you I mean, it sounds like you took some engineering courses, so maybe you have the best of both worlds.
I did. I did about a year's worth of engineering. So, got through kind of differential equations, calculus, and through some circuitry classes. But that was so long ago. That's like a foggy memory at this point. But no, I think, Richard, you're right. At least what I tell clients, and I think is true, is that I and my teams, we have to learn the technology in each case, as a reasonably smart layperson would. And so we think that gives us an advantage because we're never going to get lost in the weeds, because we're just not going to have that capability. And so we're going to be able to communicate with other reasonably smart people, typically the judges. And then that's going to also, I think, put us in a good position when it comes to a trial to speak to a jury.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been in private practice your whole career. Have you ever thought that you might someday become an in-house lawyer? Do you have any aspirations to do something other than being a trial lawyer?
You know, I was fortunate to have served in-house at Google. I was seconded to Google,
Oh,
gosh, maybe about 18 years ago now,
oh,
back when it was a smaller company. I think this was in 2005. And there were two in-house lawyers handling all litigation for the company. And one was going out on maternity leave. And I went in and covered for her. And so I handled, I think it was the non-patent docket at the company. So all of the class action cases, the antitrust cases. And then I also Google did this very interesting thing at the time that many companies do now, where they would embed a product lawyer in many of their engineering teams and in many of their product teams. And as those teams went forward and as their work got more significant, they would often have a litigator come in and just advise as to risk of potential new products and the like, kind of assess, give a legal and business risk assessment.
yeah.
And so I got to do that, and that was fascinating. I mean, it was obviously a fantastic company with extremely smart people. It was great. I just realized it wasn't, fortunately, I was given an offer to stick around if I wanted to when the secondment ended. But, two reasons I didn't. I had told John Kecker, I was at Kecker and Van Ness firm at the time, that I would come back. So I'd given him my word, number one. I made partner, while I was away, and he was going to come back as a partner. But the second reason was that I had real trouble sitting in the gallery for significant hearings and having other people advocate. They all did great jobs. Google obviously hires fantastic counsel, but it was just hard for me to take a back seat. It really just confirmed for me that what I really wanted to do was be the one standing up.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting how, in a way, it's kind of cool you got to be, a corporate lawyer early on and have an in-house experience, because that really just confirmed to you that what you do is what you really like. Because sometimes, otherwise, you'll never know, right? I mean, a lot of litigators always wonder, or outside private practice always wonder, gee, but I really love in-house. But because you got to experience that, or they want to think about being a corporate lawyer, you kind of experienced that. Well, now you know that what you do is what you like the best.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in that regard. As I said, people, I tell summer associates and young lawyers this at my firm all the time. When I remember being in their shoes, and when I would go and I would meet a partner or even a senior associate, oftentimes they look like fully formed lawyers, and they were all put together, and you thought, man, how did these people ever get there? And I always had this assumption that they must have known from the beginning and kind of figured this out and knew that they wanted to do this.
Right.
And, I'm the perfect counterexample, which is that I had no idea what I was doing, went to law school randomly, didn't like what I did at first, and lucked into finding something that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Well, Ashok, I really appreciate your taking the time. It's funny because I've done, as you know, over 100 of these interviews, and I can always tell right away when somebody really loves what they do, and you're a great example of that.
Thank you, Richard. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate the invitation.
This is Richard Hsu and Ashok Ramani. Thanks.